All right, let's start. Welcome back, everyone. It's time to start our second and the last panel of today. This year has seen, as we all know, quite a few elections in Europe, also in other parts of the country, and one across the Atlantic that, as we can imagine, probably will have far-reaching implications for international cooperation going forward, including in the Arctic. And to help guide our discussion through a discussion about what we can expect will be Dr. Ian Lesser, who heads the Brussels office of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Ian is this distinguished fellow and advisor to GMF's president. He served himself as GMF's acting president from 2020 to 2021. His expertise includes US foreign and security policy, transatlantic relations, and European and Middle Eastern affairs. Ian also holds a chair in transatlantic trade and economy at the College of Europe in Bruges. Dr. Lesser, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. It's very good to be with you here and to continue our conversation. And as we've heard, we're going to shift gears, well, slightly, because I think some of the earlier conversation anticipated in some ways what we're going to talk about. But to do this with maybe a more explicit transatlantic twist to it. And as you'll notice, what we've decided to do is actually divide this conversation in two segments so that we can be more conversational and talk in the first instance about what's new in a transatlantic setting that bears on the issues that we're talking about. And secondly, what are the prospects for concrete transatlantic cooperation? Well, how can that be operationalized? Lots of things have gone on in this context, not least an election in the United States, but also some changes on this side of the Atlantic that are affecting policy. And I think we'll test this in the conversation. I'm not wrong in saying that it's become a bit of a tougher environment, geopolitically, politically, maybe in other respects as well, at the same time as all of the sort of priority issues that have dominated discourse on the Arctic and the High North continue to be priorities. And how do we make these things fit? Will it be possible? So that's a bit what we're going to talk about today. And I'm very pleased to have three wonderful people with me to address these issues. And I'm just going to introduce you to them very briefly. Claude Véron-Révy, who's sitting next to me, head of division for Western Europe and at the External Action Service, and also special envoy for Arctic matters. My GMF colleague, actually, Christine Berzina, who's managing director of GMF Geostrategy North. And Joanna Icavalco.
Yes.
Okay?
That's right.
Oh, gosh. Thank you. Who is director of the Arctic Center at the University of Lapland in Rovaniemi. Three wonderful people to address this topic from different perspectives. And maybe, Claude, if I could start with you, just very broadly. I mean, we don't really know what we're going to get from Washington over the next months and years. We'll find out. We'll find out. But the agenda remains important. The issues aren't going to go away. Europe will have to interact with the United States on those matters. How do you see it? What are still your priorities when you think? We heard a bit from Secretary General Sanino earlier today on climate and resources and security as priorities. But if you look a little bit more directly at what can be done with the United States, what would you aim to do? Not to say what is possible or what you'll propose, but what's that space within which you would like to be working with the United States?
That's a big question indeed, because I'm the EU, and the EU needs to start with a big caveat. No matter what, when we speak about the Arctic, we have to say that Arctic states have the primary responsibility for development in the Arctic. So this is said, but of course the challenges are much bigger than any individual state, which is why we need to look bigger, think bigger. And of course we've lost, in terms of cooperation, half of the Arctic, Russia. So we are left I mean, the world is left looking at the Arctic with only half of the Arctic, the like-minded, who can cooperate. And the cooperation with the US has always been excellent, and we want to continue as much as is possible to exchange with the US, and this is a conversation that we need to have with the new administration as it comes along. And I would say that the priority is exactly the big issues that Stefano Sannino highlighted, and that are top priority for the EU, absolutely within our competence, which is climate change and support for science cooperation. And more concretely, if I look at some practical issues, we could look at with the US, but also with Canada, by the way, and with our dear and close partner that are Norway and Iceland, is everything related to wildfire. Marston, the chair of the Arctic Council, spoke about wildfire repeatedly earlier today. Permafrost thaw. This is a strong reality, especially in the European Arctic, in the Russian Arctic, which is our neighbor, and in Greenland. This is a threat for us as well. And something else, because we have put a lot of money into it, Copernicus and Earth observation. So I think earlier this afternoon, Charlina Vicheva, the Director General for DG Mare, mentioned how much money the EU has put into the Arctic hub of Copernicus. It amounts to nearly 400 million euros. And this is very important. The EU is a very important player in this respect, and is there to support its member states and to support its very close ally. Something I want to insist on, and Stefano mentioned, whatever we do, we want it to be sustainable and inclusive. So inclusive means, of course, the Arctic states, and primarily the Arctic member states, partner Arctic states, but also indigenous community, NGOs, and business community, if it applies, and the youth. So all this is very important to us. And let me give you an example that was, again, mentioned earlier by Charlina Vicheva, which is what I call the AURC. I think I'm the only one calling it the AURC. It's Arctic Urban and Regional Cooperation, which is a network of cooperation between cities, towns in the Arctic. And these towns come from Canada, come from Alaska, come from Greenland, Iceland, Norway, and the 3 Arctic member states. This is really an emblematic example of North-North cooperation across the Atlantic. And it works very well because it's concrete, and also thanks to the support of the Arctic Mayor Organization. So this is the kind of thing also where we can cooperate.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And it's a perfect transition, actually, a really perfect transition to Christine, because one of the things, well, I hope you'll tell us a little bit about what we might expect from this new administration when it comes to these issues. But also, it seems to me that this is an area where it's not just what Washington does. It's also how Europe and other actors can engage with cities and states and regions in the United States who are particularly active in this space. So, but anyway, Christine, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I want to say that I certainly do not speak on behalf of any administration within the U.S. So the German Marshall Fund, we're a transatlantic policy organization, think tank, working on transatlantic cooperation. But I sit in Washington, and I work on northern issues, Arctic security, and also homeland questions in North America. So my views are not those of any State Department or any White House. But as I look forward, we're in an interesting moment of transition where we can have some informed guesses about what might be happening next and what is new in priorities. And the thing is, a lot of what is new is probably not going to be all that new, but consistent. There is always a bit of alarm with changing administrations, and the stakes are often very high. But I think we're going to see, first and foremost, a great deal of continuity. And if we look back at the first Trump administration's policy documents and strategies, and we look at the Biden administration's strategies and think forward, well, what could be coming next? Certain things, I think, are going to be consistent. And a focus on national security is going to be incredibly high in the next administration. But national security, and well, security was a top priority in the 2022 national strategy for the Arctic region. And Homeland Defense was, of course, also in 2019, and the Department of Defense strategy in the Trump era previously, also the first priority there. So we see a consistent look at the concerns over security. In the Trump era, this has a very much of a Homeland Defense American interest perspective, which I think is going to be a slight nuance from what we have seen recently. But again, that overarching concern with security, and in particular with China, is going to be important. And you might think that China is something that is a big concern from the Republican side, from the Trump administration. But when we look at this summer's Department of Defense strategy for the Arctic, and if the way the issue set and problems were laid out, the questions of PRC interests and efforts in the Arctic are first, and then China's, and then Russia's are second. So again, continuity on this, I think, rather than much divergence. So military capabilities, the U.S. not being as prepared as it needs to be, is going to be a second major priority. But we have seen this in both administrations recently. But it is also something, and that is an opportunity for a lot of collaboration. Because when you look broadly at what is being telegraphed about what could be coming next, whether you look at Project 2025, however much credence you say, it's not a formal policy document, but it provides inclinations. The notion of needing military capabilities to be improved, and the need also to cooperate with allies and partners on some of those military needs exists, and it doesn't really matter which administration you're looking forward. And that is on everything from ICR to drones and icebreakers in particular, which are an especially sore spot. And the issue set is going to be different this time around than the previous time because of the NATO enlargement. So you have two more, Sweden and Finland, allies that are now in NATO, as well as Arctic states. And so we're going to see a lot of these issue sets move also possibly more into NATO. But changes, and I know that changes are probably what is getting everyone's stomach in a knot. Climate change, which we heard from Mr. Sanini this morning, is the most important one, or the first one from an EU perspective. That is going to be downgraded most likely because it is not the key frame, although environmental concerns and the implications of the fact that the world is different, that the ground is not the same ground it was previously, that is going to have to be dealt with, but it's not going to be a policy framing necessarily. There is also going to be probably a bigger focus on extractive and economic activity. So environmental protection was probably higher as a priority in the Democratic administration, and now going into the Republican one, we will see more of a focus probably on the economic activity in the extractive industries. It's possible to have less of a multilateral approach, but also maybe a more muscular U.S. interest-driven approach to multilateralism. And where does it fall with the element of cooperation or not, I think is a little bit still to be seen. There are other shifts that we can see, a move maybe for defense issues. So we've seen the projection that less of a role for the U.S. Coast Guard, more for the Navy, and how that would, of course, influence more broadly how the U.S. defense forces are engaging across the world. If the Navy has more of this Arctic focus, we'll see. But these things, I think, are more limited in change than could be because of the realities. And I think it's because of the ongoing security and geopolitical reality, which has to be dealt with no matter who is in the White House. And there is the ongoing climate change reality, with the fact is that there are gigantic effects that are visible in an everyday way that simply will have to be addressed. What words are used about them doesn't change the fact that there are realities that need to be fixed, and money will need to go towards addressing this reality. And that is something that will need to be dealt with, whether it's put into a frame of economic cooperation or economic development or growth of opportunity. That's also possible. But again, I would expect more continuities rather than changes.
Steen, thank you very much. I mean, and one of the things you point to, which I think is quite notable, is it's not only the question of how much geopolitics, how much security in the agenda versus other things, it's also this question of sort of economic agendas, possible differences over those, different approaches to raw materials, different approaches to economic competitiveness, economic nationalism, right? Not just from Washington, but actually from many different quarters that can make it more difficult to cooperate, but also might create some new incentives. So, Joanna, if I could turn to you to share with us from your perspective how you think, well, how it looks, but also maybe specifically on this question of, you know, how do you preserve the space to work on the environmental issues, the scientific issues, the non-security agenda, which has been so important across the region for the last years, but still remains important?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I think that my colleague panelists, they have already emptied the money machine, but I'm trying to, you know, to put some coins in. First of all, I'm here representing research and science, so I'll be then using the language of research and science. I may be saying things as they are, so don't get hurt. And I'm not here just representing the Arctic Center, the University of Lapland. I'm also representing the Arctic 6, which is a network of universities in northern Sweden, Finland, and Norway. So, I also already now apologize if I say something that you don't agree on. What actually happened to us almost 3 years ago was that our research environment in the Arctic changed dramatically. The Arctic Center had been collaborating with Russian researchers for more than 30 years, and in one night everything was wiped off the table. And that has been a big identity crisis to us. And it's not just an identity crisis, it's a crisis of knowledge providing, because now we are lacking a lot of data from a large part of the Arctic. And that slide there actually is from me. I just wanted to visualize the geographic area of the Arctic that is lacking from their knowledge and like monitoring that we can do. And that's like the more than 50% of geographic Arctic. And this is really something that has kept us busy. And that is also why I'm probably in this panel discussing the transatlantic connections. And while doing that, I'm also talking about collaboration with Canada. So what we want to do in the future, and what we are doing already now, is that we are deepening our research collaboration with US and Canadian research partners, research institutes, networks, universities. And that is certainly something that is needed now, as we need to know all about the Arctic. All the developments that were ongoing already before Russia's attack war in Ukraine are still ongoing, and they are getting stronger. And we can't afford not knowing about them. And I hope that you will ask me about the developments that we want to study, but I won't tell you that just yet. Ask me first.
Please tell us.
Well, thank you so much. I didn't expect this. Well, of course, international cooperation and governance is one of the things that we are extremely interested in. And it's been a pleasure listening to the Arctic Council, and the Arctic Council is alive and kicking, and that's good. That's extremely good news, because the Arctic Council is the one and only cooperation forum for environmental protection and agreeing on topics related to that. But then, of course, the climate. And the climate change that is 4 times stronger in the Arctic, it's even 2 times stronger here in Central Europe than what it is in elsewhere on the globe, on average. And this is certainly of a big worry. And to us, to be honest, we remember the Trump's governance last time and what it meant to Arctic environmental protection. And we see Trump is a catastrophe, as we already have a climate crisis. I told you I'm going to say these things aloud. So that's one of the big worries to us, and especially now as there's a lot of data missing from the Arctic now, as we don't get that much data from Russia. So what's going to happen with climate actions, true climate actions? And that's one of our big worries. What's going to happen with Paris Agreement? Is US going to stay in Paris Agreement? That's another thing. But then we come to sustainability, conflicting interests of land use. There are so many interests what comes to land use in the Arctic, in the north. There is renewable energy, wind, water. In some countries, there is still peat production, forestry, agriculture, reindeer herding, so on and so forth. All these possible conflicts are of interest to us for the research community, and of course then the use of natural resources. Trump may be saying drill baby drill, but what about the price for oil or coal? Is it really competitive? We are interested in that as well. Or what about peoples living in the Arctic? Let's talk about the peoples living in the Arctic and their rights to stay there, to live there, not just manage. And then the entire environmental protection. We don't have too many good news to polar bears, do we? No. Yeah. So, and then the last is the security in the Arctic. And I wanted to save this to the last. It's not the least one, but of course we are worried about what is US going to do with NATO? Are you going to withdraw? What's going to happen? But whatever happens is that there will be a demand for a strong EU, and there will be demand for increasing Nordic cooperation. That's for sure. That is what we can see when we put the future goggles on. And still, after saying all this, we think that China is the biggest risk to the Arctic in the long term. So these were the bad news. I also have some positive news, but I won't tell them just yet. I will
save it for just a moment. We'll get to it, I think. Claude, if I could come back to you, and maybe to ask you a little bit about some of your assumptions about some of the development and transit issues in the Arctic. I mean, because this seems to dominate the general debate so heavily, the opening or near opening of the northern route and all of these sorts of things, the debate that goes on about shipping into and out of the Arctic driven by economic development versus actually a transforming transit route, which there's some skepticism about. I mean, what are your sort of basic assumptions about this looking ahead? About the general issue of Arctic development and as opposed to the transit question, where China obviously has a huge stake.
Thank you. Well, first, the transit, the Northern Sea route, I mean, yes, everybody is looking at it. We know that it is tested piecemeal by Russia, by China, but we don't see for the time being ships sailing in a safe and predictable manner. And shipping is about predictability, because shipping is about saving cost. And if in the middle of your route there is a storm and the ship is immobilized, this is massive money that is lost because it was not according to the plan. So for the time being, we see all this research going on. We see the interest and we understand why there is interest, but we don't see it happening as of yet. When we talk about the development in the Arctic, definitely, I mean, there is a growing economic interest in the Arctic because of all the resources that potentially there is in the Arctic. But we have to be careful, number one, that it's sustainable, number two, that it benefits also the local population, because this interest in economic resources that sit in the Arctic are mostly driven by geopolitical consideration of economic security, which is one of the big conversation in Brussels and everywhere, but we need to go about that in a sustainable and inclusive manner. And that gives me the opportunity, since you mentioned critical raw material, to highlight that the EU has signed a critical raw material memorandum of understanding with Greenland and with Norway. And talking about climate change versus security, yes, climate change is the #1 priority for the EU, but actually we rather describe it as the most comprehensive threat in the Arctic. That doesn't mean that this is the only one. And we're fully aware that there is also a security threat. And well, we are talking about an area which is an area where the 7 Arctic states are NATO member states, so that matters in terms of competence. We're also talking of an area of territorial water that matters also for the EU. But still, we engage more and more in security dialogue also with our very close partners, notably because I see our friends from Norway and from Iceland in the room. But we engage more and more in the security and defense dialogue with them, with in particular in mind the theme of hybrid and cyber threat, the cables in the Arctic, the critical infrastructure in the Arctic and elsewhere, in the Baltic as well, and also to discuss EU-NATO cooperation. So we're trying to balance the two conversations. It's true that previously it was exclusively climate. Climate remains as the most comprehensive threat.
Thank you very much. I want to save some time in this mini session to go to all of you for some questions. But before we get to that, and I'm conscious of our time, I just wanted to maybe come to you, Christine, and then to Joanna to give us some optimism at the end, your other list. But also, Christine, if I could ask you, I mean, we've talked about NATO and EU and so on. I mean, how do you see, by the way, on your question about, I don't envision the United States withdrawing from NATO. I don't think, will we make life difficult in NATO? That's another question. But anyway, I'll see if Christine agrees with me. But the question of specific, NATO attention to the Arctic and the high north, and whether there isn't some, from the EU side, a bit of the strategic autonomy question that could have some application in the north.
Well, I agree with you that I think withdrawals from things, especially initially, are highly unlikely. The question is, how do all of the formats that the U.S. takes part in, how are they beneficial to the United States? I think that is the key test for everything in the very beginning, which means that in some ways there's a big challenge about how do you approach the U.S. In the next months, and yet it also provides certain opportunities. And so I don't think that there is an immediate hopelessness that should be coming, although it's certainly challenged. Now, what are areas where Europe could be showing strength, or what are areas for cooperation? What Claude was saying, the question of infrastructure development, the question of risk management in economic activity, this will require broadly transatlantic cooperation and expertise, both on the NATO side, because also there's the critical undersea infrastructure questions are valid at NATO, the EU expertise, and the experience that Europe has right now because of the repeated incidents in the Baltic are essential for North American partners to understand and to learn from. That is very much in the American interest or the Canadian interest to understand what is working and what is not working on everything from public-private partnership, investigation, how do you go from the civil or criminal into the national security realm. Everything is being tested here and is essential on the other side of the Atlantic. So I think there's a lot of hope for that. And simply search and rescue, for example, is a different area where there is so much to learn that is essential for all the communities that are in the North American Arctic as well as in the European Arctic. Because as we see the increase of cruise ship travel, or as we see the development of more resources, or let's say digital cables or other things that are coming across, how do you manage that? How do you manage incidents with that? This will require sitting down at the same table and having a productive relationship. And that is the area that we're going to be able to work on, and that really there is strength in the European approach and the strength and experience from communities, from the local level, that needs to be brought up to the awareness. And if you prove that case in Washington, I think you'll be okay.
Thank you. Johanna, please tell us the reasons to be optimistic.
Thank you so much. But first of all, Christina, I really so wish that you would be an advisor for Trump's administration. That would be grand, wouldn't it? But yeah, giving you hope, first of all, there will be more super rich people in the US, that's for sure. And our hope is that most of them would find those little philanthropes in themselves, that they would start donating good money for research. For example, if gas and oil don't sell, what if they would actually invest on the study of renewables? That would be something, wouldn't it? Or donating to climate intervention research. That's another alternative. But then again, we also have some other alternatives like moratoria in Central Arctic Ocean. Establishing them for the time being so that things would be settled, that the wars are over, because they all will be over at some stage, to do some practical and powerful environmental protection by establishing moratoria. That might be something. And if you wish to actually talk about all these topics also in the future, the best news is that Arctic Center is organizing an Arctic Spirit conference about elements of security in the Arctic in May next year in Rovaniemi. So the discussions will continue. Welcome.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. And we have a little bit of time to go to our audience. There are a number of hands. If you could tell us who you are and where you're from, that would be super. Thank you. So maybe just right in the front here. There's a microphone on its way to you.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Stanislav Jouillet. I'm Polish and French. I'm former trainee at the European External Action Service, and I'm graduate from the College of Europe. I would like to ask a question to Ms. Véron-Réville and Ms. Berzina on the security discussion. I'm curious to know if there is any scope for increasing transatlantic cooperation in the field of cybersecurity and into the fight against disinformation, into the field of hybrid threats, and also the instrumentalization of migration. So from the EU side, do you think that what can the EU do more in this field to enhance its capacity to act in the Arctic and to enhance its presence? And from the US side, do you think that this discussion can trigger some appetite from the US administration? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If we could go and perhaps we'll collect a couple and come back to you. Just on the aisle. Just there with a hand. Well, that one, and then we'll go to the back. Please.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Linda Solsand Dahlberg. I work, as of today, for the University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway. My question is to Joanna, but I'm happy for everyone to chime in if you have thoughts. What, in your opinion, can be done from the Arctic knowledge institutions and the EU to strengthen and foster tighter collaborations on sustainable development in the northern regions? And are there specific topics you feel like this is more crucial than others? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we can go for one more, and maybe, well, two more maybe. There's someone with a microphone already, so go ahead, please.
Hello, Dr. Damien de George. I'm a Reykjavik-based consultant. Just looking at beyond 2025, first, climate change. Not even 10 years ago, we had the Paris Agreement with the goal of 1.5 degrees. Today, we hope 3 degrees. And in 10 years, we may be very happy with 4 degrees. Second, geopolitics. 10 years ago, we didn't think a country could leave the EU, and we, of course, couldn't think about debating that a country could leave NATO. 5 years ago, unthinkable about Sweden and Finland in NATO. Within 5 years, perhaps the same story with Norway and Iceland with regards to the EU, something which, of course, could question Greenland and the Faroes. So my question is, how do you think the Arctic will look like on January 20th, 2029?
Okay. Okay, thank you. And maybe just finally right here, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Irene. And my question is mainly, I think, for Joanna Incavalco, but also is open to the rest of the panel. Research and science in space has continued despite Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Now the talks are a bit different, but we've seen continued cooperation in that field. Why do you think that has not been the case for Arctic research and science? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's come back to maybe some very brief comments on whatever. Some of them were directed to you in particular, but there's the cyber question, sustainable development, wild cards through 2029 or was it? Yeah, it's far enough out. And why space and not other things? Claude, please.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, 2029, that's the one I'm most interested in. So I dream that there's no more war and invasion against Ukraine, that the war is over and won by Ukraine. That's an important part. And that we can go back to cooperating with Russia, but that's a dream, nothing more. No, I don't think I can say what it will look like in 2029. We can just note that the landscape has dramatically changed. That's all. And there are adjustments, and it was quite a fantastic, impressive adjustment that Sweden and Finland joined NATO as a consequence of this full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Someone asked whether there was room for more cooperation with the US on security, cyber, migration. Look, we are right now exactly in a transition situation on the side of the US. The objective is certainly to maintain what we have. For the rest, I leave it to my colleagues to take the time to take contact with the new US administration. Yes, of course, between like-minded, we always wish for more cooperation, but that's not the right time to make forecasts. Let's give it a bit time.
Thank you. I think on the security questions and the cooperation questions, if you look at what is on the to-do list, besides icebreakers, from the US side, then ISR, so intelligence and surveillance reconnaissance, these are very big priorities, and I think something that is needed on the European side, in the North Atlantic, and in North America too. But that brings up questions then about the security of said infrastructure, big investments, information sharing, and so that area, because it's already high on the to-do list, it seems like for the incoming administration would be a very productive area to be looking at. On the disinformation side, there's a question of what is the influence of Russia and China in shaping narratives, and that is ongoing and certainly something that should be looked at on both sides of the Atlantic because the tools are quite similar. And so there needs to be the ongoing conversation. But again, I don't think this will be as high of a priority or as easy to do as maybe some of the infrastructure investments and cooperation on the soft elements, the knowledge base in that. Question to the 2029, I mean, I sit in Washington mostly, and so the year that everyone worries about in Washington is 2027. So this is the year that there's the question of Chinese military capabilities being strong enough to pose a risk to Taiwan. And so depending on how 2027 goes and whether we are in a kinetic universe, which I certainly hope is not the case, but if we are in an active military conflict, if there's a China-Taiwan situation on top of whatever the situation is in Ukraine, then the Arctic will be affected by this. And firstly, through all the fora that we have talked about thus far, a active military conflict between many powers in various theaters is going to make cooperation very difficult in multilateral institutions. And then the question is, how is the Arctic domain being used in the case of a highly kinetic and worrying scenario? And as we look at the investment in dual-use technologies across the Russian Arctic by China, this is something that could have a very serious Arctic dimension. But these are all very scary scenarios, but something that is possible, although probably very unlikely. And yet, I would say what everything looks like in the 29 space depends so much on the great power geopolitics a couple of years before.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the questions about research and science. First of all, the Arctic 6 network is actually, it's providing knowledge about the Arctic. But the thing is that with the EU, we could and we should be improving the communication. Here in Brussels, there is no one-stop shop for Arctic information and Arctic knowledge. So what we have to do is that we actually have to go and meet a lot of people in many DGs and individuals to tell our Arctic message again and again and again. And you start feeling like a broken record. And I thank Carla Gansland, Clara is probably here. Yes, hi Clara. Thank you for telling me last year that me feeling like a broken record when I come here with the Arctic information and Arctic mission, that's the right feeling, that I should be feeling like that. So that's all right. So improving the communication between the knowledge providers and then the knowledge users here within EU, that would be, or here in Brussels, that would be really something. How does the Arctic look in January 29? It will look slippery and wet. And then about the Arctic research, we actually do cooperate in research in all disciplines that there are. The thing is that there are EU restrictions to financing, so there is no money transfer from EU countries to Russia. So we don't do the research with Russia, not with individuals, not with organizations, but there is Arctic research cooperation on all disciplines that there are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would almost add myself, I'm worried about 2025. 2029 is far out, but thank you all for the questions. Joanna, Christine, Claude, thank you very, very much. It's a wonderful conversation. Please join me in thanking our speakers. And we're going to go right into the next session, the second half. So if I could, thank you, if I could have our next set join me, that would be wonderful. Please. Hello, please. Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, we're going to try to move as seamlessly as we can into the next, half of our discussion. If we cover some of the same ground, but from different perspectives, I think that's absolutely fine, actually. So we're very pleased to have with us another wonderful group of people. Bergdis Erilsdottir, who is with us, Senior Arctic Official, Ambassador at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Iceland. Thanks for joining us. Ulla Kirsika-Vainio, Mayor of Rovaniemi. Thank you for being with us. And Wilfred Nordland, Member of Parliament for Nordland and Chair of the Standing Committee on Business and Industry in the Norwegian Parliament. Thank you very much for joining us, indeed. And maybe as we did the last time, if I could start out with some broad gauge questions, but take them where you like because you have different perspectives. Maybe I could start out from maybe the Icelandic perspective, if I may, on sort of a bit of what you were hearing in the last session. to be honest. I mean, your geography and politics and place in other institutions gives you a certain perspective on the transatlantic relationship. How do you see that translating into the Arctic and High North setting, from your perspective?
Thank you. And thank you for so many people still being here so late in the day. I must say we've been talking about the elections a lot. We had the elections in Iceland on Saturday, and you know, being awake all night to catch then a flight very early on the Sunday. It's yeah. So apologize for if I seem a bit tired. But transatlantic link. I mean, we feel we are the transatlantic link. You know. All countries have a very special relationship with the US, of course, but we feel that we have a particularly close and important relationship, and that is, of course, because the backbone of our security policy, of our defense, is our bilateral defense agreement with the US from the early 50s. So it's very important, and I mean, just talking about, be it security or be it Arctic policy, I mean, how can we deal with any of the issues in the Arctic without the US and Canada? Now we have a situation where we don't have Russia on board, and then it becomes even more important to have the close ties, relations, cooperation with the US and Canada. And of course, we don't know what Trump will bring. I think, as previous speakers have said, I think China will weigh heavy in the new administration, and at least the experience I had with the last Trump administration was that the China scare was very important and brought a lot of high-level visitors to Iceland, for example, and so I think that will become even more prominent. And you know, you might think whatever you want about this. I mean, for us, for example, we're from the Icelandic perspective, we think that Chinese influence and what China is doing in the Arctic is exaggerated. The scare is too great, but that could also be useful. You know, to keep the focus of Washington towards the Arctic, so to speak.
No, thank you. And I'd like to come back to that, in fact. But if I could, maybe to go to you, Ulla Kersika, to tell us a little bit how it looks from your perspective, a local, a regional perspective, but also, you know, Finland membership in NATO, how has it changed, you know, your working life in and around Rovaniemi?
Thank you for the question. Of course, I answer now from the perspective from city, and because we are very new one in NATO, and in the city of Rovaniemi, we are the military base, and we have very used to see soldiers in our region. We have had over 20 years international military training in our region, and the situation right now is that we really waiting for what will happen. We really don't know. Do we have or how many new soldiers, for example, from US or from other countries will come? So the situation is very new for us, but I think that attitude towards NATO in our region is very good, and we are waiting for.
Okay, if I might just follow up, I mean, how is the city dealing with some of the, you know, directly with some of the pressures that are coming? My wife and I actually go up. We spend a lot of time in Rovaniemi for different reasons, but between tourism and other impacts, it's a challenging environment, leaving aside these big geopolitical things that we're talking about, which bring their own challenges.
Yes, we are tourist city right now. We have the season, it's going on right now, and we are waiting for the more than 1 million tourists to our city in this season. So we are very international, but when we didn't not in NATO, and Russian start the war. I think that time the situation was a little bit uncertain, and many companies, tourist companies, think what will happen. But when we going in to NATO, I think the situation is more relaxing, and we have had the message from for example, for Spanish tourists, they told that it's more comfortable and more no fear to come to Rovaniemi, for example.
Thank you. Wilfred, how is it looking to you in terms of, and also your feeling about this question of economic investment in the region and how it is affected by the broader geopolitical, geoeconomic setting?
Yeah, thank you. I think we have to stop hoping and start acting. Because a lot of the issues we have been debating here today, I have been a member of parliament for some years, and before that also both youth politician, as we was some of the former on the stage here. And we can analyze the situation. We can hope for a better policy question from the new Trump administration. But on the other hand, we know the interests, we know the perspectives. They are not new. It's the old ones, right? We have this hope or dream, if you say, that the geopolitics was dead after the fall of the wall in Berlin. No, it wasn't. And the last major player in the power of geopolitics and fight about resource is most likely not born, because we are human. So in the right conditions, which we are seeing now with rising in prices where you use energy as a weapon, we have seen that before in the human history. That's not something new, but we have a lot of policy in place from different countries that has been acting like this is never going to happen again. Come on, people, haven't you have a fight about, with your neighbor, as you always have? And of course, this also moves us over to other topics. This is progress. How do we secure our own security when we are in an uncertain and unsecure world? You act. You actually say what you mean, and you hope that you will get some leverage or someone hear you, what you say. And the perspective from the last panel here, where if you actually can bring something to the table when you're discussing with the Trump administration, you most likely will be heard. For instance, from my local perspective, I'm half from Andøya, which we are now building the new, hopefully successful European space launching pad. And everything goes well, we're going to launch this in a couple of weeks with small satellites, which is going to be provide us with more data on shadow fleet, shipping, biodiversity development, climate change, Earth monitoring, and so on and so on. And there also a large part of it is for the defense policies, which of course US will be interested in, and NASA is present. And I'm from Sortland, which is the head base for the Coastal Guard, as the security police in Norway says. I'm living in the area with the largest interest from foreign interest abroad, and which it has been like that for several decades. That's not something new, but we have economic growth, as they also have in, which is the picture behind this screen is Bodø, where I'm born, even though I'm living a little bit farther north. The economic growth, where the local businesses, population, indigenous people can take part, is the best preservance of the Arctic in itself, because this is people acting together, talking together. You understand your neighbor better than you do a friend from the far abroad, even though you are friends, right? You are on the same pages. And thereby I can also relate to the inhabitants in Alaska, in Canada, in Greenland, in Sweden, Finland, and also from the Russian perspective. This is more or less a fight for something more for your family, for your home, and so on. And we also have to act on that as politicians. How do we provide the best possible deal for as many as possible? And if you do that in the Arctic context, then I think there is hope for the future and a more secure and stable world. But don't be surprised. There will be some bumps on the road towards that future.
Well, Fred, thank you very much. Bergdis, if I might come back to you. What are some of the things that you see happening with the United States? Things that you do there. What is the practical dimension of this? You mentioned some of the defense issues, but other things that, in fact, you would like to see more of, or perhaps less of. Anyway, the operational side of it. Just a little bit more texture on that, please.
You mean then bilateral relations, or
the bilateral
yeah,
sense?
Exactly. I mean, we
with Canada too, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can say, and I can go better into that our relations with Canada have been growing, for example, we have had. I mean, we are very much now focused on this north to north. I mean, we always were. I mean, we have a West Nordic alliance where we have cooperated very closely with our neighbors in Greenland and the Faroe Islands, which is also like part of the Nordic cooperation, which is something that we could come into, because I think sometimes people, we have started taking it for granted in a way, but then when we start talking about it with our friends and allies elsewhere, we realize how close our relations are and how much we do cooperate, exchange views, and so on and so forth. So that is one aspect of it. But when it comes to bilateral relations to the U.S., I mean, they are our closest ally. We have our most important trading partner, and that is, of course, some of that. Some of the things we're hearing out of Trump's camps these days, of course, is worrisome for us when it comes to the trade front. Although, I mean, we would think that. Because at least if we go by what the last Trump administration was, they were not very multilaterally focused. I mean, they dealt bilaterally, and I think you're absolutely right that you have to bring something to the table, you have to have something interesting to offer, and then you're fine. Or you have to be saved, as I alluded to. So I think, I mean, we see that bilaterally there are opportunities. I mean, it's not. And I also agree that it doesn't need, we don't think it will be like 180 degrees of change. Also, change takes place, and you only have 4 years to change. You can't change the world. But of course, worrisome, the climate crisis. It's not just a question of how you frame it, but it's also a question of how you will deal with it, and we need more financing on that and all of that. So I think, yes, there are opportunities, and they are more bilateral than multilateral, but then there are, of course, other trends, especially when it comes to, because we are a small, open economy, and we, for us, free and fair international trade is of utmost importance, as it is for all the Nordics. So yes, we can see positive things coming out of this, but worrying trends as well.
Absolutely. There are things to be done, even if it's transactional and more bilateral. If I could ask you about the cities dimension a little bit. Your contacts, even as they are now, with the United States, with Canada, the transatlantic piece, city to city, maybe just to talk a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you. For example, I'm working in the group of Arctic Mayors Forum, and I think that this is very important forum for all of Arctic cities, because I know it's very important we talk about in many conferences and etc. Indigenous people's things, but we have to at the same time remember that on the Arctic there is many other people, our local people too, and it is important that we have the special place where we can speak the cities things, because we have to have more understanding between cities, because I think that we do in the cities so many things. For example, we try to avoid climate change problems, and we building a lot different kind of infrastructures, and we do many things between we try to solve many kind of problems in the cities. And if we don't have any place to where we can share our ideas and our if we don't understand what for example in Alaska, for example in Anchorage, people think it is problematic, because I think that we have a very similar kind of problems in every cities in Arctic.
Oh, thank you very much. And Wilfred, if I could come to you. I mean, you obviously, in your roles, think a lot about economic investment and development. What would be on your wish list, especially in a transatlantic, to get American, Canadian, perhaps also investors interested in things that would be regionally important for you? What's on that list?
Where to start? No, but I think there are some. One is the space dimension, of course, but there is also, I have a Nordic perspective on it as well. Partly because I'm living so far north, it's easier to me to go to Finland than it's go to Oslo. But so it's more a west-east dimension also on the debate. And I was on a wish list conference last week, actually, back home. But that was more on infrastructure level. But if you're looking at from economy growth, it has to do to solve some of the problems that which the mayor are addressing as well. There are some common issues among the cities or municipalities which are somewhat better solved together, because when you're pooling into more resources, more heads, you most likely will get a better answer. That will also be the answer when you are debating what to invest into. Regardless of that, and I could use example here of China and so on, when they decided, let's put 5 million heads in that university to solve that problem. And then the European politician says, hey, we are going to be the world best. Come again? What did you say? Because that is not possible if you can't pool your resources. So you have to make some picks. We are going to try that, and that, and then we have to pool resources together to try to solve them. If it's more water in the streets when it's raining more, because this is going to be a problem for all the Nordic countries, especially when it's raining in the winter, because that is a large problem, even though it's snowing a lot at home this day. And then the main problem, then the local inhabitants then will ask, when is the snow plow coming? And that was the large debate on our Facebook group back in my street this morning. I was saying, yeah, they are most likely coming in a couple of hours when they are finished their local roads, then they're getting to your driveway. But that wasn't a perspective that was met very good. The economic growth can be made through a couple of key things. One is climate, energy, and these kinds of questions. The other is regarding natural resources, and then not necessarily on hydrocarbons or so on, but especially on minerals, because everything we are going to need. And the Arctic region is full of minerals. And we are going to have a discussion about that tomorrow as well. That is two things we actually have a lot of similar bilateral interest between the 7 Arctic states, but also, of course, from Russia. But to do these things, you also have to have knowledge about the climate, and thereby is an opportunity to get the data we need to climate research and natural research. Because when you are connecting these things in a different kind of research perspective, you actually can get more value out of it. But that's not what you bring on table in the US. Then it's how do you actually drill in Alaska? That's a question. But that same data will matter for us when we are debating how to save the city of Rovaniemi from the changing of weather, right? So it's an interest for both parties in itself, and thereby through the already structure in place, the Arctic Council, there is a possibility for more research, bilateral or multilateral, where you actually go together and say, hey, we have a problem we want to solve. What's in it from the data we are going to produce from this kind of research for us all? And then most likely we also have the possibility to pool together more financing and thereby get a better result. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much. Well, let me go to all of you for a final round of questions. And again, just catch our eye. Right there, please.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Rasmus Bertelsen. I'm a professor at the UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. I'm a Danish national and I grew up in Iceland, so I cover the different parts of the Nordics. Two quick questions. Bergdis and also Wilfred brought up, for example, China. And I think we in the West, we have to keep in mind that we are a very small minority of humanity, maybe around 12–13%. And of course, as the others get richer and with better science and technology, things change in the world. So how Iceland, Lapland, northern Norway, how do you think about making your parts of the Nordic Arctic part of this wider world, where, of course, countries like China, India, ASEAN countries, etc., are very important economic, science and technology actors? That was the first question. Second question is, I don't understand this concern for attracting the attention of the United States. So in the case of Iceland, Iceland is so crucial for commanding the North Atlantic. So quite frankly, the United States will defend the United States whether Iceland wants it to defend defend Iceland or not. And of course, in the case of Greenland, the Kingdom of Denmark has no choice whether the United States defends Greenland or not. And the United States has drawn enormous benefit during the Cold War, having access to northern Norway. That's why the United States paid 90% of the Norwegian intelligence service during the Cold War. And now the United States has very important advantage from having access to northern Norway, northern Sweden and Finland. So why this concern about attracting the attention of the United States? They have great advantage from having that access. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? Yes, just on the other side, please.
Hi, Aina Fagreng from Bodø, where Wilfred was born. I have a question about, going back to the other panel, about safety, like safety and military versus climate. What comes first? Because when the climate gives us some opportunities when the ice melts, we can do monitoring of the grounds, we can better understand what's happening in the Arctic, but as well we get the direct opportunities to kind of touch down on, for instance, mining or new routes and connecting the Arctic in a new way. How do you, as politicians or in politics, work with that aspect? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more. Someone would like to come in? Going once? Okay, I have one of my own, which I will add to the list, which was a good list already. How do you fit in the wider world? The US is going to be interested anyway, so how do you deal with that? The security-climate nexus? Well, let's come to those, and I have one very express question at the end, perhaps. So perhaps we could start with you, Wilfred.
Yes, thank you. No, it's an interesting observation, which the Nordic countries, at least, I'm not that familiar how Canada sees it, but I think it's somewhat similar. But we have a tendency to forget that we are a minority in the world, and that we are going to be the world best in everything. And while we are that in ski sports and winter sports and so on, we are that on a few key components, both research available and also in business-like, where the different country has some where we are on the top, or in periods of the last 10 years has been on top, which you are quite good at. And I think we have to invest more time in that also into the future. We are very good in, if you take the Norwegian, of course we have the ocean deep sea drilling for oil, but also when it comes to shipping management, especially through Kongsberg Gruppen. If you go to Finland, you have the old Sweden. It's mining, for example. When you go to Finland, it's or was technology. They are again most likely going to pour a lot of money into research, also the ground research in itself, which has over the last decade borne one of some of the larger technology companies and technologies. And if you go to Canada, it's also drilling natural resources, forest or management of forest. Of course, I know that's a debate in Canada, by all means. And also Denmark has their kind of frontrunners, especially regarding architecture and running the smart cities in itself, and so on. It goes on. So we have to be even better in those kind of areas, because we won't be that in IE or something other. That's a little bit far-fetched, I think. But China and other large players are going to push us a little bit around, but we can bring a lot to the table, and especially that regarding the natural resources. And therefore, I don't fear to attract the interest of the US. And we have I'm going to take a short example here. In my own county, we have one of two factories in the whole Europe which are processing quartz. That quartz is imported from North Carolina in US, which are, by the way, a very Republican district or state. And after that process is mostly shipped to China. And this is the component where you have to actually build high-speed internet cables across oceans. Thereby, you have an interest in all countries to actually make this go all the way around. And there is something else we have been good at, managing natural resources. All the countries has been quite good at that, and that is something we're going to be good at on the further on. And then it was the climate change and opportunities. All these questions is actually the same. How do we actually work together to put together more resources? If it's infrastructure, which we have a debate on last week, or is it the different kind of institution regarding the universities? And how do we put together the different MPs, state and policymakers, actually, where we have possibilities, in my opinion, to do more, be better, and actually take the initiative and present something, even that the world would like to listen to.
Thank you. Ulla Kersika.
Thank you. I can't speak from the country level, but I think that cooperation is maybe the most important. Even we have the big tension between, for example, with China and maybe with the USA or with India. I think that we just do different kind of cooperation. We can't nothing that there is millions and millions Chinese engineers who can solve maybe better many questions than we do, but doing good cooperation, and we have to do many kind of diplomatic way that we will have the possibility to do cooperation somehow, I think. And I think also that what we do in cities, we have the environment authorities, and we do environment permits in the cities. And I think that this is very important, that we have to be good example in that field and do things better than they do in China, for example. I know that we have to be more efficient but at the same time we have to do things more sustainable way also.
Thank you. Bergdis.
Yes, thank you. I think for the first question over there, I mean, you might be born and raised somewhere, but your English accent was very Icelandic. Anyway, but I mean, you're absolutely right. Of course, the US has an interest in Iceland because of geography, because of, you know, and that, of course, we saw in the Second World War. I mean, we did not really invite them to come, but they did. So yes, I agree with that. But the thing is that, you know, where's the threat coming from? I mean, the US is very much focused on the Indo-Pacific, much more now than they are in the eastern flank. And I mean, of course, Ukraine was not being brutally invaded by Russia in the last Trump administration, but they thought the Europeans should be taking care of Europe. That's sort of the thinking in DC. Well, sometimes, I mean, it's like they can't really decide sometimes. They want us to do it, but then they also want to be there. So, you know, it's a bit of a, you know what I'm saying. So, but the thing with China is that, I mean, it has changed so much in just 10 years. I mean, it's not like we as Arctic states, we are inclusive. I mean, they are observers. We did support that very strongly when China became observer status in the Arctic Council in 2013, as well as the other observers, because we need them. And also, when you sign up to be an observer in the Arctic Council, you also accept the international law, the law that is, you know, is important for that area. So you want them on board. You don't want them outside doing something that, you know, that is unacceptable. But the thing is that China has changed so much. I mean, we were all rushing to China for trade, for relations, I mean, free trade agreements, what have you. But you know, we need to be now more cautious when it comes to China, and actually nobody knows what China is doing in the Arctic or what they think they will. Of course, we know there are resources that they want to, but this recent also cooperation with Russia is very alarming to us. But you know, we should be cautious. But of course, you are absolutely right. You cannot ignore China. You have to work with China, whichever way you do it, and in particularly when it comes to the climate issues, where they have actually been more progressive than many other countries.
No, thank you very much. I mean, I think what you've all said has underscored an interesting point, which is that if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, it would have been rather different. But let me also just play on for a 30-second from each of you, maybe if you'd like, if you agree, off of something that was asked in the back of the room, which is if we were meeting again and having this conversation in 2029. 2030, let's round it off. What would be different? Very quickly. And of course, if you think it would be the same, that's fine too.
Some of the things going to be the same. The changes in the world's climate is going to still be there. There are most likely some new conflicts that we haven't even thought of, we haven't seen them now, but most likely also have solved some new problems. And that is actually a world moving forward. And then we can hope and work together to achieve the goals. But we actually have to start working, make the suggestions, and then might actually be a better world in 2030 than it is today.
Thank you. Please.
I think we have better infrastructure in the Nordic countries, maybe new railway connections from Rovaniemi to Narvik, for example, and maybe we do better cooperation between authorities in the Nordic and in Arctic.
Super, thank you. Bergdis.
Of course, we always want to be optimistic, and maybe we just just leave it to the youth to solve this. I'm sure after hearing the previous panel, I mean, I think we should just draw them closer to us and maybe, you know, very inclusively. So, but I'm hopeful, yeah, innovation, bright young people, we will be in a better place.
Thank you for that. That's a wonderful place to end. Please join me in thanking all of our speakers. And I will hand it back to you.